everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Gio and Joey Show. We've been working things out. We've been busy. We've been letting life happen. But we're going to be posting more regularly here as the new year goes on. As I mentioned in the previous episode, episode number 33, where I went solo, we are going to be doing live streams on Monday nights to help with the editing. Save us time there. Joey, how you doing?
Speaking of handles, our handles are right below our pictures there. So follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. So introduce the clip we're going to see. Well, not mainly the clip, but where the clip comes from, because we're part of that show as well.
Yeah, Daily Wire Friends is a community of conservatives and fans of the Daily Wire platform from around the country. At this point, around the world. Shout out to Ben over in the UK. But we've just come together around our appreciation for the cultural impact of the Daily Wire. We've been able to establish some really good friendships. I definitely recommend, if you're over on X, to try to get involved with that chat group community. It's some of the best friends you'll ever make in there. Just around the same kind of, well, we all have different views on things. We all generally are conservatives who love America. Most of us are Christian. There's some Jews and some others as well. But we all kind of want to preserve the American experiment. And so we have different opinions, and like any family, sometimes we disagree, but it's a great group. And yeah, first watch this video and then go over and check out some of the Daily Wire Friends back catalog.
All right, y'all know the drill. For those of you that are new here, you need to drop your answers in the chat below. If you're not watching live, drop it in the comment section. Try to engage with everything.
Let me pause right there. We're doing it at 1.75 speed. Like that, we don't take the entire 25 minutes. But that being said, enjoy. You can still understand what they're saying.
Yeah, Donnie doesn't really sound like an alien, guys.
Even after everything's aired, so make sure you're doing that. We love the engagements. So here's the yes or no of the day. Based on the First Amendment, religious freedom in the United States is absolute. No exceptions. Yes or no? I want to know your answers down below. And I'm going to turn this over to the box here.
Before we hear the box's opinions as far as just yes or no, and we can nuance it later, what's your gut reaction to the question?
So I know you want a quick answer. It's actually complicated. Properly understood, religious freedom is absolute. But obviously, the nuance is you're not allowed to do anything in your religious freedom that harms other people or that invalidates their rights. They're going to get into that too. But it's a complicated question. But my instinct says yes, but.
Okay. Joey is not one for quick answers. I'll give you my quick answer. The religious freedom is absolute, but there are nuances. And so we'll go into that.
This is a Greg Garcia question right here.
Based on the First Amendment.
You guys ready for school?
Based on the First Amendment. Based on the First Amendment, religious freedom is absolute. No exceptions. Yes or no?
Yeah.
Greg?
Oh, you ready?
Yeah.
I'm going to say no. That's no is my answer. But
all right, it is. The answer is yes, but you got to take it in context. So the First Amendment is not just the freedom of religion, but it's wrapped around freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to protest, and freedom of press. All those things are wrapped around, and one can't be without the other, because the entirety of the intent of the Constitution of the United States, it is a tyranny suppressor. It's not with the idea that one day we can have a utopia of good governance. It's the idea that no, government will go corrupt if you give it too much power, and so you spread out the power. So, for instance, let's say we live in a country that there was a lot of Muslims, right? And that became the majority. Well, since we have freedom of speech, we can say, hey, I don't believe in Muhammad. I think Jesus is better. Or we can have whatever contrary religion, and they can never become a power, because history would tell us what happens when you give the Christians all the power. You see what I'm saying? So it's a tyranny suppressor, but you can't have one without the other. So now, is it absolute in intent? It is absolute in the idea of unalienable rights and keeping those four together as a tyranny suppressor. In fact, I'd say the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, you can never be changed. You don't want it to be changed. If you change it, then you change the entirety of the intent of like the preamble of the Constitution.
Okay, so
what do you think of what Craig said there?
So of course I largely agree with him, and I think in practice, or in theory, I completely agree. Although in practice, I actually think it might be, like for instance, if America were to become first of all, I fully believe Muslims have every right to religious freedom in America, and they should. But I think practically, if this hypothetical, which obviously I don't think it's going to happen, but if it were to happen, right, if the majority of America were to become Muslim or Islamic, I don't actually think religious freedom would continue to exist, because I think what we've seen in a lot of Islamic countries is a desire for that not to happen. And so I think America was born out of a particular time and place, right, in Western Christianity and Protestant, and based on Protestant values, and that's why we can have religious freedom. I actually think if some other religions were majority, I don't think we would. I just think they would. I don't think we would continue to have our same legal tradition if we had a completely different peoples, if that makes sense.
I agree with you there. I think religious liberty only comes from Judeo-Christian beliefs. You look around all the world today and you see that it is in the countries that have these Judeo-Christian principles that you do have religious liberty. And so I think that's important. I like what Greg said, tying it to the Constitution, but we know, you and I know, that the Constitution itself is going to be attacked as we get closer to what we call the end of time. And so, does religious liberty supersede the Constitution? And this is where some nuance you and I are going to talk about, because ultimately, the notion for religious liberty is above the Constitution.
Oh, absolutely.
Just like all godly principles are above the Constitution. The Constitution is great to implement them in a country with diverse views, but religious liberty should take place anywhere, whether it be in a Christian country or in a Muslim country or in an atheistic country. That's a universal principle that should apply, but we see it doesn't. The Constitution is helpful because it helps gird that stronger than any other principle or government that we see around the world. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, you hit the nail right on the head. And what you're getting at is the concept of the natural law, right? Or what we talked about in one of our earliest episodes, right? When we discussed the abolition of man, right? The law that undergirds law, right? And so the Constitution, I think it's the greatest political document in the history of the world, but it's only good because it recognizes what was already there, right? In other words, the Constitution didn't give us our right to freely worship. The Constitution didn't give us our right to defend ourselves, right? The fact that we're human beings made in the image of God means that we have these rights, and the Constitution recognized the rights that we have inherently. But here's the thing: a martyr in some Islamic country, they still are free, right? In the sense that they still have the inherent right to freedom of religion, right? Even though their government doesn't recognize it. So government is only legitimate in so much as it recognizes the inherent rights of individuals.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So let's continue with the video.
It is absolute as long as it's within unity with the other aspects.
The First Amendment, yes.
All right, so
The
freedom of
entire First
religion,
Amendment is absolute.
you have the right to practice whatever religion you want, put up whatever religious displays you want, and nobody has a right to stop you from doing any of it. That's your position.
Yes, within the context of a freedom of speech, within the context of freedom of protest your government, and within the context of freedom of press. You need to put those four together. You lose one of those, then one of those entities has the better opportunity to become a tyranny.
Okay.
That's the idea behind it.
And Dennis, we got your answer is no, so go ahead and elaborate on your answer, Dennis.
I can't imagine that it's absolute because I think it also has to be checked by other laws. Now, maybe there's something that I'm not understanding. I can't, for instance, what's that?
Unalienable rights. You have to understand those.
Right, but if somebody if a cult were to crop up and gain,
That's why you got freedom of speech.
When Dennis first said this, that's where I was leaning, right? That the answer is no. But then I started thinking, because when Craig spoke, he was like, yes, but there are nuances to it. Well, then that doesn't make it absolute, is what I was thinking. But it's absolute because it's not just me living in a vacuum desiring religious freedom. It is me living in a society that values somebody else's religious freedom. So that in itself is a guiding principle that would stop certain aspects of me wanting to do anything to somebody else. The moment I start using my religious freedom to impinge on somebody else, then no, it stops being religious freedom. It starts being tyranny on my part. So yes, it's absolute, but within it being absolute, it has its own internal checks and balances that aren't dependent on somebody else. Your thoughts on that?
I totally agree with you. And I would say it's absolute if we're defining religious freedom properly. And religious
Exactly.
freedom is the right. What is it? What is religious freedom? It's the right to worship God according to the dictates of your conscience or not, right? And that's it, right? That's what religious freedom is. That is absolute. Right now, if so, say, um, if you believe, let's say you're part of some sect and you believe that human sacrifice is a thing. Well, I'll go ahead and say this. You have an absolute unequivocal right to believe that. But the moment you start acting on that, well, then the natural rights of the other individual, well, what is one of the natural rights, right, that we see enshrined in the Constitution, but not given, obviously? Well, it's the right to self-defense. Well, the minute you decide you're going to start sacrificing them, their right to self-defense kicks in, and they're like, no, and they would have the right, to defend themselves, whether it's with a gun or whatever, or more importantly, to address the government, which is there to protect their individual rights as well as yours, to say, hey, listen, I'm all for this religious freedom stuff, but I don't want to die, right? So I think the limits are clearly there in the Constitution, right? In other words, because in order to respect everyone's religious freedom and their right to life, right? What is it? The right to life, liberty, and property. If you infringe on someone else, if everyone has an equal right to those things, then it by nature dictates that we can't do anything, that our religious freedom doesn't include anything that infringes on someone else's.
Yeah, and I go back. I know we're talking about the Constitution and all that, but I go back to the fact of what you said the definition of religion is, right? To worship God according to the dictates of our own conscience. Well, I think within itself, excuse me, I have allergies. Within itself, it is self-governing, not dependent on the Constitution or anything else. And so that to me is the coup de grace, the important foundation of it is that properly understood, religious freedom is self-governing.
You're going to come against that cult, and you're going to go, your religion sucks, and I'm going to tell you why.
But right, no, I'm saying we can combat them against in that way. But if there's a religion, and I know this is hypothetical, I'm sure there's probably something that, but like say let's say Jim Jones is practicing in America, which he did before they moved to Guyana. Are you allowed to abuse people? Are you allowed to, at the force of gun, and say this is part of our religion? We're a suicide cult, and this person is part of our religion is required to commit suicide. So are you allowed to cause harm as part of your religion? I know some Satanists will say, we want you can't infringe on abortions because it's part of our religion. It's part of our religion. So it's
he brought up abortion, and that is exactly what we're talking about, right? You and I believe that a fetus, the moment of conception, that if left untouched, will develop into a baby, which will then develop through all the stages of adulthood, right? Until eventually they die, let's say, of old age, at the good, ripe old age of 99. So at no point does it stop being a human, even if it undergoes changes. And I think that is so key because your freedoms, all of your freedoms, end where another life begins, which is why Joey and I are not pro-abortion. We're against abortion.
Yeah, and I would say part of this conversation is we need to have the conversation of duty, right? In other words, because liberty, yes, liberty is incredibly important, right? That's kind of the whole reason we really started this podcast, right? We saw liberty of conscience being abused, particularly in the COVID era. And so, yes, liberty of conscience is really important. But the flip side of liberty is duty, right? The whole premise of America's self-governing republic is that we'll have self-governing individuals. And so here what we see is abortion, right? Yes, there are Satanists who claim this as a religious liberty right. And here's the thing, and we're going to get into this more because a Satanist issue is at the heart of this. I do believe Satanists have a right to religious freedom, but that right does not include the right to kill babies, because here's the thing, a mother, while she has complete religious freedom, right, she also has a duty as a mother, right, inherent in her, and a father has a duty inherent in the relationship between a father and a child, and there's a duty inherent in the relationship between a mother and a child. And so no freedom that you could have can supersede that duty.
Yes, and that's why it's so important. And as I contemplate this, That's why the individual is so important. And to us here in the Gio and Joey show, liberty of conscience is so important. We're going to defend that, and that starts in the womb, and it starts till, Canada and places like that have euthanasia. And we have to balance these things because they're nuanced. Yes, people can make choices. Yes, people can do things. However, the moment you start infringing on somebody else's right, including that of the unborn, that's where we have to have these discussions.
Once tenets of a religion start infringing on other people, I mean, I guess if you subscribe to that religion, that's on you, I guess.
Okay, let me give you kind of an insightful answer here. What happens when you go out in regular nature with no law, right? And you want to kill something or kill somebody? What are the repercussions just in nature? What happens to you eventually? What are some of the circumstances, the outcomes of that?
If you've got a conscience, you feel bad about it.
Sure, but I mean, also too, you have confrontation against it, conflict against it. Animals, they battle for apex of the higher predator. You have with human beings and tribes without law, right? Just tribal socialization. You have, people fighting back, things like that. So you in society, in natural, like what things that are embedded into nature alone will take care of those issues. So you can say the what ifs, but if you have a constitution that's based upon natural law, then sometimes there's going to be tension where it's not going to work out perfectly, but it will remedy itself because nature itself remedies itself sooner or later. So you can play the game if I want to.
What do you think of his analogy there?
So he was getting a little Hobbesian there, which I was a little. I'm not a Hobbesian, but Hobbes states, right? I think what is this state? The state of nature, right? Is life is short, is hard, brutish, and short, or something to that effect. Where listen, I mean, I think it's true that there are certain realities of human nature because we're fallen, where things get crazy. But I actually think what people do in a state of nature, my view is because of natural law, because of the conscience that we have within us, our tendency in a state of nature is to form civilizations and to form governments to restrict that, right? So in other words, I don't believe that we would ever be in a total state of nature where we would just be another one of the animals. But that was the view of Thomas Hobbes, who was kind of one of the early liberal thinkers. But he was more on the monarchist side. But so I would have a slight disagreement there.
Yeah, I'm going to give him a little bit more leeway. I don't think he meant it that way, but just the notion, right? That if you try to kill somebody, they're going to defend themselves. I don't think he was taking it deeper than that. If you're trying to sacrifice me in your religion, we got a problem because that's not part of my religion. So I don't think he's taking it deeper. But noted, I do like that if you take that analogy further, it can slip into that. Let's go back to the video.
I want to change and cut things off. But sooner or later, nature's going to catch up to you. You're going to find out. You can want that. You can desire that. You can make laws for that. But it's going to come and bite you at some point and bring chaos and destruction. That's natural law. And so the Constitution was based upon that. And so that's baked in there, embedded in there. And once you start to put it into practice in this fallen world, it actually keeps society as civil as it can be.
I'm loving the debate. I'm thrilled that
true.
Abby threw her hand up because I'm wanting to know Abby and Billy's opinions on this as well. Abby, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm definitely not an expert on this. So this might be more of a question. I don't know. So I was under the impression that, for example, for like freedom of religion, that yes, you're free to practice religion as long as it doesn't infringe on others' rights. And so we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I have the right to life. So if you're a satanic cult and decide you need to sacrifice me, that infringes on that right of mine to life. So you can't do that. That was, again, maybe it's more of a question. Like, isn't that how it works? Like,
well, that would be, again, I think maybe the answer would be that they're violating your First Amendment right. You have the freedom of religion as well. I'm not a part of this cult. You can't sacrifice me as a part of your religion. I mean, that would be a First Amendment check against that. Again, like with the Jim Jones thing, if you join a satanic religion
and I think that's where Dennis finally came to the right conclusion. Because remember, at the beginning, he said that no, the answer is no. But then here he ties it into the fact that you're not practicing religious liberty in isolation. You're practicing religious liberty, which is absolute, but in a context of society. So yes, I'm free to worship whatever I want. And I'm free to practice whatever I want. However, the moment my practice infringes on somebody else, that's where there are issues. But to me, that comes as inherent in a true understanding of religious liberty. Your thought?
Abby started her coming out by saying, I'm not an expert. And then she goes out and lays out straight facts. So I totally agree with what Abby said, right? And I like how she even said it there, right? Yes, the Satanist has religious liberty, but not to sacrifice me. So I just thought I'd yeah, I don't really have anything to add to that other than spot on, Abby. Don't sell yourself short.
For real,
great.
Abby. Yes. Don't sell yourself short. Let's continue here.
And you allow yourself to be sacrificed, I guess that's on you. And whether or not the government should step in and stop you from doing stupid stuff.
So, Billy,
That's another question, I guess.
what are your thoughts on this, Billy?
It's over my head.
It's over your head, huh? Okay.
Well, okay, so I do have another.
Not to be religious. I don't know.
I can answer Abby's question. So, Abby, you said in the very beginning, you start to mention a little bit of the preamble, talking about, liberty and things like that. So I'm going to read the preamble real quick to you guys, because this is what is going to set the context for the entire Constitution. So when I practice a First Amendment, I have to have the preamble in mind. If I don't have the preamble in mind, I'm really not practicing Constitution. I'm doing a free-for-all of some sort. But it says there, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, right? Ensure domestic tranquility, provide the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. So all those qualities that I'm talking about, they all apply to the freedom of religion that goes rogue and doesn't practice general welfare, doesn't practice something that's going to bring blessings to your posterity and things like that. And so that's why when those things happen, or when laws are made, a true constitutionalist will base their laws with that intent to, common defense and domestic tranquility and establish justice, perfect union, all those other things. That's what's going to go on in the context of the Constitution, of all the amendments, of all the articles and everything else.
We got Hallie
You're
Worth.
saying I was right. Thank you.
We got Hallie Worth in the chat
You're
saying
clear. You're getting clear on your answer. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
we got Hallie Worth in the chat saying Schoolhouse Rock for the win, and I'm gonna agree on that. Now, I love that we had this discussion here, but one thing I have to observe is that it seems like in everybody's arguments here, you're taking it to the extremes. Abby, for example, you said one person's religious freedom and rights doesn't have the right to trample on your rights. So you have the right to life, liberty, and happiness. But if some other a person of another religion says that their religious beliefs is to sacrifice you, that would be an infringement upon your rights. But that's taking it to the extreme. We have a situation going on that doesn't necessarily go to the extreme, though. And I'm going to let Michael Knowles tell us about it.
That was a really good discussion. First of all, I would push back a little bit on something Dennis said, in that I actually don't think even if the harm is going to be to yourself, I don't think you necessarily have an absolute right to that, right? So, I don't think anyone has a right to commit suicide. Now, I think practically it's not a good idea to jail people who are mentally ill and want to commit suicide. But no, I do think society should intervene and hospitalize people against their will, right? Or we have a process in the U.S. of conservatorship, right, where you can be, as an adult, can be put under the guardianship of someone else if they're deemed a danger to themselves. So I actually don't even think religious liberty extends to harm to oneself, right? Like if you're part of a cult, like a doomsday cult, and you're going to commit suicide, I think the authorities can say, no, your right to life and liberty are got to be protected, right? Even from yourself, right? You don't have the right to kill yourself, right? That's not a right that exists. That's not a natural law right. So I would push back on that a little bit. But as far as what Greg said, something that I think he actually made a point that's really important, and it's something that conservatives uniquely add to the political discussion. One of the purposes of government, it's something that in a lot of the post-World War II American thought we've neglected, but one of the primary purposes of government is to pass on a stable society from one generation to the next, right? And that's one of the things our founders listed, right? Ensure that we give our posterity a decent society, right? And so in our discussion of religious liberty, that is important as well. Are we passing on a society where our children will be just as free and just as knowledgeable about how to use their freedom as we were given? And did our ancestors give the same thing to us? And so I think that's an important aspect to bring here. Is part of the conversation is we have to not just think about ourselves in isolation, but ourselves in relation to the next generation.
And that's important because of what's going to happen next, right? Here we're going to see Michael Knowles talk about it, but you have to understand Michael Knowles' background, especially his religious background, and why he believes the way he believes. And Joey and I are going to discuss that because your prior assumptions are going to inform your religious liberty attitudes. So see if you can pick it up where Michael is coming from. Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say one thing. Because we're going to get into our religious disagreements with Michael, and that's fine. We've done that before on this show. But I actually like Michael Knowles. I think he is a very honest and thoughtful person from his perspective and training as a Catholic. And I'll just say that, right? My issue is not with Michael having the view that he does about church and state. That's not my issue. My issue is that America, which was founded in the Protestant tradition, right? And too many Protestants in America don't understand their own history, don't understand their own theological roots. They haven't read Roger Williams. They don't understand the argument that the original Baptists made, right? Or John Wesley or these guys. And so they take any religious discussion, right, from guys like Michael Knowles that's very solid in what he believes, but they don't understand the differences that we ought to have between us because they don't understand the issues enough because they're not rooted in their own faith tradition. And so I don't hate Michael for what he's saying. His saying is actually very coherent from a certain point of view. I just have an issue with that point of view as a Protestant.
Yeah, well, I got deeper issues because I'm looking into the future, but we'll get into that. Let's look at this video and the point he's making. And the point of this entire discussion up to this.
If you happen to be in Iowa this week, you can catch a satanic altar put up on display at the Iowa State Capitol. This was put up by the Satanic Temple. The co-founder of the Satanic Temple says this is a symbol of the Satanists' right to religious freedom. Of course, Satanism is not entitled to any rights whatsoever, and the Founding Fathers certainly wouldn't have thought so, and no one, even the great defenders of religious freedom, not so long ago would have ever defended this, but this is now what religious freedom is taken to mean, that you can have a symbol of Baphomet or the devil on display, and you have a right to that in a government building. The founder of the Satanic Temple...
Let me ask you this question. Why do you think that people of long time ago wouldn't have defended Satanism as religious freedom? Because I think he has a legit point, but not for the reasons I think he has a legit point, or not for the reason that he thinks he has a legit point.
But he's obviously correct, right? Even John Locke, right, the father of liberalism, right? He would not have defended the religious freedom of either atheists or Satanists, right? He said that explicitly in his writing. Now, while I have a slightly different, a view, I believe that the principles of freedom, right, applied to the individual should include all people, as we've been saying, right? So I believe in the same way that, say, the view of liberty when in regards to slaves has evolved, right, to include more people in liberty, I think so too our views of religious freedom have evolved in a good way. And I think, Roger Williams, again, I'm going to come back to him all the time because he's the father really of religious freedom in America as we understand it. And he explored this more, is that religious freedom really does apply to the individual, right? And so I would include it to Satanists. And we're going to get into this conversation a little bit more about the State House specifically, and what I think's going on there. But that would be my answer to your question. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, religious liberty doesn't apply to just religions you like. Religious liberty applies to religions you don't like, just the same way freedom of speech applies to speech you may not like. And so, yes, the fathers of yesteryears may not have applied it, but they would have been wrong. So much so that you could see even in scripture, right? God allows other nations to have their religion. Now, what happens at the end time is separate, but within the freedom and the context of having to decide whether you worship the true God or not, he allows you to have that freedom. He's not forcing anybody to worship him. You have the freedom to worship whatever you want or not to worship at all. So that's where you and I would defend the rights of atheists not to worship if they don't want to. Let's keep going with the video.
Real quick, I had one other thing I wanted to say. So obviously, Gio and you and I, we're not shy about the fact that we're Seventh-day Adventists. I mean, I got it right there in my handle. And one thing that our church very strongly believes in is religious freedom for everybody. And we have a legal department of our church, a religious liberty department, that has argued religious freedom cases at the Supreme Court. Well, one important doctrine of our jurisprudence in America in regard to religious freedom is, what's the exact phrase? Truly held. I forget what the exact legal phrase is. But
inalienable rights?
No. But like, you have an absolute right to your truly held religious beliefs, right? Like, so in other words, when you're defending, if you're defending a case, right? So say we'll take a Sabbath law, right? Like a Sabbath exception from work, right? If you go to court, and this applies, there was a recent one for a Sunday keeping Christian as well who worked for the Postal Service, and he argued that it was against
By the
his
way,
religious freedom.
defended by Seventh-day Adventist lawyers.
Of course, because we would defend
Mhm.
everybody's right to worship
Mhm.
on their day. But the core of it is this a sincerely held religious belief, right? And so in other words, if you're going to court and then it comes out, right, that like if your employer finds out that you're then using that Sabbath or Sunday exemption to go to the movies or to go out drinking, that can actually undermine your case. And so what I would say about Satanism here specifically, one of the things that actually does undermine their case when it comes to being allowed to have a display is the fact that the Satanic Temple literally says on their website, we are atheists and we're making a mockery of Christianity, right? So, but this goes to the larger discussion as Satanists have an absolute right to worship Satan in America. But does the people of Iowa or of any other state, do they have a duty to accept just any religious display in their public buildings, right? So we're not talking about like a private practice of religion, but we're talking about a public display. And I would say that the people of Iowa have a right to say, hey, we don't want our children to be exposed to this satanic thing when we're walking through, particularly of a people that explicitly say this isn't even our sincerely held religious belief, right? So I do think there's some nuance here. But what happened here, so a Christian veteran, ended up beheading this statue, right, illegally, and he was arrested for it. And listen, I do think he was wrong to do that because there is a political process, right, for the redress of grievances that can be gone through, right? We live in a law and order society. And so, no, vigilantes don't have the right to deface statues. Now, it's also true that we have spent the last several years of the left defacing statues they don't like and facing no consequence whatsoever. And so that's also wrong, but it's not now right because someone on our side is doing it. But that would be my issue. Is like the people of Iowa have the right to exert and say, hey, we don't want this statue here. They don't have a right to say those Satanists here in Iowa, we're gonna persecute them and jail them. That would be wrong. But when we're talking about this public space, that's where I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I like a point you made up is that you're right. On their own website, they are using this to mock religious liberty. They're using this to mock Christians. So they do not have a sincerely held belief. However, that being said, there's a fine line. Are we going to start then allowing the government to dictate you're sincere, you're not sincere, you're sincere, you're not sincere? Right? Then you start making the sword the judge of who is sincere or not. The reason we can hold on, in this case, they blatantly say it, and so that's different. Is that what you were going to allude to?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. But the other point is, when it comes to public displays of religion, right? So I'm trying to think of a good way to say this. Do local governments have, like, okay, so for instance, Dearborn, Michigan that's a town near, it's a couple hours away from where I live, and it's the largest Islamic population outside of the Middle East. Now, if the citizens were to have, say, were to start a park, right, an Islamic park, right, should they be able to decide, right, that, hey, we're going to have, that's probably not a good example because Muslims don't do any kind of images but like for this example, pretend like they do. Say they wanted to have some sort of Islamic thing in their public square, and all of the members of this community agreed to it, right? Should they be allowed to do that? I think yes. I think Muslims should be allowed to have their religion in public. But say now I don't know, some cult, right, that believes, like, let's say some gay cult, right, that likes to do gay stuff as part of their
Nah,
religion.
bro, cut that
No,
out. Yeah, that's too much imagery.
but do they, the point I'm making is, does that, like, while we would agree that the members of that cult to a point have religious freedom, do they have a right to their practice of it in this Islamic community? I would say the people of that community would have to say, like, listen, we're not going to have that publicly here, right? So that's what I
Well,
was just
I
saying.
think a better example would be would people who have a religion where they have, let's say, multiple partners or orgies, right? Would they be allowed to broadcast that on Times Square because it's part of their religious liberty? The answer is no, right? Because of common decency and the welfare of protecting my individual rights, right? I don't want my children to see that. So I see where you're going, right? But that's the beauty of that, right? Is that now we're talking about what you and I talk about, natural law, that second tablet of the Ten Commandments that fall in how we treat each other as neighbors. And so, yes, we can legislate some of that stuff without appealing to religion or without appealing to scripture.
Yeah, and I would agree with what you're saying there. And so I had a conversation with a buddy of mine who's a lawyer. He used to work, well, for Inside Baseball, the General Conference. For those who don't know, that's the governing authority of the Adventist Church, right? That's our structure. And so my buddy used to work as a lawyer for them. And one point he made about the satanic statue is that, yes, the people of Iowa, right, we can distinguish between Satanism and real religion, and we should be able to do that in public spaces. But part of the problem here is, and why I actually don't think it should be our number one issue of establishing the norm that Satanism is bad or whatever, is that we don't live in that society, right? The church has failed in its job, right, of keeping Christian morality as the baseline in America, right? Where we can have liberty because people generally have a Christian sense, right? Like, even people who don't go to church, right? They kind of understand whatever. And that's, like, back to what John Adams said, right? Our Constitution was created for a moral and religious people. So he's like, so we can make this issue the number one issue, but it's not going to get us very well outside of our Christian circles because most people just don't really care. They view Satanism as superstition, and they view Christianity as superstition. And so we don't live in the kind of society that can say, yeah, we don't want public displays of Satanism, because we haven't done our job, right?
We're going to really relish the opportunity to be represented in a public forum. We don't have a church on every street corner. My feeling is that if people don't like our display in public forums, they don't have to engage with them. They don't have to view them. Okay. If you're a normal person, you probably have a problem with this. Now, some of you might not. Some of you might say, oh, whatever, it's dumb, it's silly. The Satanic Temple, they're just a bunch of edgy Reddit-tier atheists anyway. Who cares what they want to do? I don't like it. I don't want my country to exalt satanic symbols. I think that's bad. I don't want shrines to Satan in my government buildings. I think that's a bad thing to do and doesn't speak very well of our country. And I want it out. And I want to ban it. And this would not be a new ban. This would be reinstating a ban that existed for the entire history of our country until approximately 5 minutes ago. I think that would be good. I think that would be normal and American and right. Now, you might look at that and say, well, it's okay. It doesn't really matter. I don't like it. It seems wrong, but hey.
What ban is he talking about that he said was instituted 5 minutes ago? Just because we didn't understand religious liberty. Look, I don't like it either. And if there are ways to get rid of it, I'm all for it. But you got to be careful. And like I said, this alludes back to where he comes from theologically.
One of the issues that we're, like, knowing, like, our view of Bible prophecy, what we're running into is we know that there is a pendulum, right, that I don't think that necessarily negates that we should have these conversations about what the limits of religious freedom are, but we have to understand that there is a danger and ultimately at some point a reality that we are going to lose freedom and we can go too far. And we do want to protect the edges of religious liberty. I think that's really at the heart of what you're getting at, is we know that religious freedom is a delicate thing. And we do have some disagreements with Michael.
You know, religious freedom, right? So then you got to ask the question, if you know this is wrong, but the premises that you have about religion and politics lead you to saying that this is fine, how do you reconcile those things? One of them is, they can't simultaneously be good and bad. So which is it? How do you reconcile your natural opposition to Satan statues in our state capitals with religious freedom.
Because this is one of those scenarios where, Abby, to use your example, it's not necessarily infringing upon your rights, and it is their religion. Michael says that they don't have a right to that religion, but yet the Constitution doesn't specifically say that Satanism is the only exception. It says a freedom of religion. So I'm a little torn on this myself, because obviously, like Michael's saying, it can't simultaneously be good and bad at the same time. I disagree. I disagree in the sense of it's bad. I don't support it. That's not a religion that I would care to see promoted and advocated for. But at the same time, it's good that we don't live in a society where someone's religion can be oppressed. So, Abby, you had your hand up first. You go ahead.
So first, I just want to say, I have always been one of those people that if there's a rule, it should be enforced evenly. And what gets me about this is it is a altar essentially set up in a government building. What other religions are they going to allow there? Are they going to allow Christianity? Are they going to allow, are they going to allow like a, I don't even know, like a what is
mosque stuff? Like,
well, yeah, but like a Buddha, or are they going to set a statue of Buddha there? Like what? To what end, right? So you know that they can't just allow every religion to put a little altar there. It's just not possible. So if everyone can't do it, maybe no one should.
Well, I mean,
again, I'm about applying them. So it's not that they don't have a right to exist. I didn't actually hear Michael say that Satanism doesn't have a right to exist. They don't have a right to exist in our government buildings.
Well, now,
right?
Now I would, so I'm going to push back a little bit on that, just a little bit. And this isn't me pushing back in favor of Satanism. Understand that, okay? But I said it just a few episodes ago. You cannot separate church and state. That is a myth. Okay, that statement refers to keeping the state out of church affairs, but not keeping the church affairs out of state affairs, or the church out of state affairs.
I don't disagree with that.
Because you cannot separate a person's religious beliefs from themselves.
Correct, because I want my congressman praying before they vote, right? Like I want that.
Yes.
So I don't want you to remove it. But what I'm saying is I also don't think they should build an altar to Christ in the government building. I don't think they should do that.
So the argument that Satanists push whenever they start putting up these types of things is Christianity is already throughout all the government buildings with the phrase "in God we trust" and stuff like that.
Absolutely, it's part of how we were founded.
And so that's part of their argument is it's, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so you either argue for religion to be completely removed from everything altogether, and then you are creating that separation of church and state that was not intended, or you have to make way, because there really is no middle ground on it. It kind of stinks. It's really a crappy situation. But Dennis, go ahead.
So this is kind of a problem. I mean, this is kind of an issue I take with Michael Knowles and a lot of the Catholic people, and I think the shades over into the Christian nationalism stuff that's kind of raging on the right as of right now is, to me, it comes across as lazy. It comes across as lazy. It's a political tactic. It's not a religious tactic. And if you're a Christian first, you should care about Christianity and spreading the gospel more than you should about conforming the government to fit to your beliefs. Now, it would be nice. I've always said, if America were to collapse tomorrow and Russia were to take over or China were to take over, it wouldn't change my Christianity and my beliefs at all. I'm happy, and I think it's convenient that I get to be a Christian in America, but I'm going to still be a Christian no matter where I'm at. So I think that the church has failed so badly in America. If the way that the church took over the Roman Empire in the first 300, 400 years of its existence was through grassroots discipleship and spreading that way, and they won the culture. So if we actually, Christian nationalists and like these Catholic people who kind of want this return to the Holy Roman Empire, where the church and the state were mixed together, that's a lazy Christianity. They just want to enforce Christian ethics. You can make America a Christian nation tomorrow. That would do nothing to change the relationship with the people in the country that they have with God. You would just be enforcing ethics. And I think that's what they ultimately want.
Dennis for the win.
Yes.
That was very good.
Go ahead, elaborate on that.
Yeah, so I think what he's getting at here is the underlying issue of it all, right? In other words, Christianity, we have lost the culture in many ways in America. I was just looking at some stats about different social issues and the direction Americans' views have shifted on them, from gay marriage to abortion to all, like, just across the board, all these social issues, Americans' views have shifted to the left, right? And so Christianity, we have not been successful at propagating our views, even in the last 6 tablet issues where we can use the government justly in some cases. We haven't been successful in any of those things. And so now what we've got a movement that wants to bypass the hard work of discipleship and wants to jump right to the sword of Caesar to enforce it. And so, like, a lot of this other conversation we've been having, some of it's simply just academic. So, well, and listen, I would stand by some of the things I said about what does the state have a right to allow and what does it not to. But ultimately, what Dennis is saying is just straight up facts. Our primary weapons are not carnal, they're spiritual. The war that we're fighting is spiritual. like the question we should be asking about why there's a satanic statue in in America, in an American state capital, is how did we become a society that wants that there's a significant population in our country that wants that, right? Well, we failed on the cultural level, and now we want to just skip right to the sword. And I don't think that's the method that we're going to change the world by. I love that he alluded to the first 300 years of church history, where Christians literally turned the world upside down with no political power, right? These early Christians had zero political power. They were one of the most persecuted groups in history. And yet, what did, I think it was Tertullian who said, right, I could have that wrong, but one of the early Christian historians or whatever said the blood of Christians was seed, right? That's what spread the faith.
The quote is, the blood of the martyrs were the seed of the saints. And you're right. And I think Dennis, like you said, hit it right on, because it is lazy to want to use a sword. And there's a quote that I'm looking up, hopefully I'll get it here, by Ben Franklin, talking about that if God doesn't, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if God doesn't want to help the church, then it's a bad one. And if it eludes, and if the church wants to use the government or the sword, it's a bad one as well. So we have to depend not by the sword, but by the Spirit of God. And I think I have the quote here. It says, when a religion is good, I conceive it will support itself. And when it does not support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for help of the civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of it being a bad one. And that's exactly. And this is why we have to understand history, and the history of where, unfortunately, Michael Knowles comes from, which is Catholicism. You look at the medieval church. When the medieval church had the power of the sword, we look at the Holocaust, where anywhere between 2 to 10 million Jews were killed. Well, you look at the history of the medieval church, and we're talking of upwards of 50 to 60 million people. Now, it was in a longer time period, but nevertheless, that's the lack of religious liberty. And that's what I'm afraid people are pining for. They're thirsty for it, which is why we see it in Christian nationalism. They want the power of the sword. They want the religion and the sword. And once you mix those two together, it's not good for anyone.
I agree with what you're saying. And the other thing I would say about a lot of this is I think a lot of it is LARPing, right? Just like live action role playing, right? Like these guys, I'll see these Christian nationalists, they'll post these AI images. First of all, how inhuman is that, right? Like our art is now, like even as Christians, is artificial. It's not even human. But you'll see them posting these images of these cathedrals, and they'll say, oh, it's the year is 2180, and we've just established the Protestant Cathedral of Denver, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, we'll see all these things, and they'll say, oh, and if we get into power, we'll do X, Y, Z. But how many of these people, and I'm not going to say it's zero, right, because I don't want to judge too broadly of individuals, but I would say it's very small, and I think the state of the church justifies me saying this, is how many of these Christian nationalists are deeply involved in their local churches today, right? Doing the hard work of discipling individuals, of reaching their neighbors, of loving their enemies, right? How many of them are doing that work, like in a small way now, in their local communities? Like it's very small because I know it's very small because our culture is not Christian. So they want to jump from that. They want to ignore that work, the kind of stuff that Jesus did when he was on earth, and they want to jump right to, well, give us the power, give us the power.
And as you've heard me say in the past, is that the church, I lay the majority of the problems of society on the church. And I want to do more episodes on why I say that, because there's so much cognitive dissonance in the church, even in how they read scripture. And because I believe people see that, they see the cognitive dissonance in their lives and their professions, then they feel like, well, religion is not worth it. And so we see some of these detrimental aspects in society. And what Michael Knowles and Dennis what mainly Dennis was alluding to, we and you mentioned we have to do the hard work of discipling people. But look, it's easier sometimes to just throw the sword at it or throw money at it, and people are wanting to take the easy way out. Let's continue with the video, and we have to bring this to a close. We're over an hour, buddy, but it's a good topic.
And they know that if they were to do it the way that it should be done, through grassroots change like the early church did, it would take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. If we truly lived in a Christian nation, that Satan statue would not be in that. That would just not be allowed, and not because there's a law or anything. It just would be such societal pressure that wouldn't be allowed. So I think it's laziness to just say we need to use the government to force, and I think I think the Catholics are fine with it because that's what the Catholic Church did. The Catholic
agree.
Church,
I agree.
no wrong.
The way to correct this is through societal pressure, not through government enforcement. I would agree with you on that. Greg, I am dying to hear from you because you just advocated for absolute religious freedom, as long as it falls within line of every other aspect of the Constitution together.
Or more specific, the answer is really simple. Reading comprehension. Reading comprehension, good old reading comprehension. Look at the Constitution, read the preamble. The preamble's there to give you the intent of everything else. So does a satanic statue, does it represent the securing the blessings of liberty? No, it does not, because the liberty they're talking about is not a free-for-all. It's this idea of liberty to do things that are virtuous. In other words, the founding fathers believed they don't want the government to put a gun up to their head or to make a law that says they have to do good to their neighbor. They wanted to just be able to practice good things to the neighbor, like being honorable or helping them out or charity or things like that. They didn't want the government to interfere with how they wanted to practice that part of the virtue of whether just their own good heart or their religious stance. So does Satanism qualify for a preamble expression of freedom of religion? No, it does not. And that's where that's how you would answer that question. Now, I agree with Dennis too about Christian nationalism, for instance. And again, it's just reading comprehension of the Bible at this point. The Bible will tell you time and time again that you can't Christianize an institution. History will tell you can't Christianize an institution. In fact, it was the founding of America that the persecuted Christian church from England came over here, and they did it under the guise of a company called the East India Trading Company. I think that's what their original company was. Well, come to find out, 100 years, 200 years later, that same company was corrupted, taken over by the British Empire, and they used to use it to smuggle opium, and it was part of the opium trade to China. So you can't Christianize an institute. The Bible will clearly say that. God, in the end, it's a new heaven, new earth, cleanses everything. Nothing that's of sin or that is not contained of his holiness will survive in his great refinement of the earth. And so that's reading comprehension too. So that answers your question for Christian nationality. That answers your question for the constitutionality of a satanic church. It's all there. You don't have to really super argue it or superimpose, political religion into it. It's just right there. It's low hanging fruit if you have good reading comprehension.
So what'd you think of Craig there? I don't agree with everything he said there.
I think he backtracked from his original statement a little bit. I liked his earlier stuff better. But no. I think he's making a good point in the sense that, in this sense, it's true that true liberty, right, is righteousness ultimately. But the problem is the state. So I'll illustrate it this way by bringing a point that Andrew Klavan said in his book Truth and Beauty. And there was a point in there where he said the paradox of our time, right? The paradox is we need virtue and we need virtuous citizens in order to have a good government and a good society. But the moment that you enforce it, it ceases to be virtue. And this is something, so there's an episode of the Daily Wire Friends that's going to be dropping, of the Beyond the News show, that's going to be dropping tonight, of Dennis and I, and we kind of get into some of these issues where it's like a lot of Christians or a lot of conservatives, what they want is they want enforced right doing. They want Dennis in that episode we did. He brought this out perfectly, where he's like a lot of Christians want Christian governments, they want Christian laws, they want Christian politicians, they want Christian all these Christian institutions, but they want everything except Christian souls and Christian hearts. And it's like, but that's the opposite of what we should want. Like, we should want Christian hearts more than anything. I don't want a Christian nation as much as I want Christian people, right? I want people who have a sold out, right, born again relationship with Jesus Christ. And that can never happen at the point of the sword. And so that's why, yes, I will still defend, I will disagree with Greg here and say I will still defend the religious liberty of Satanists. Not because I endorse Satanism. I think Satanism is wicked and evil. But because if God allows freedom of choice in regards of religion, then who am I to say, no, it doesn't apply to these people?
Ultimately, right, God himself allowed Lucifer to rebel, right? He allowed him not only to rebel individually, but allowed him to take 1/3 of the angels with him. because those 1/3 of the angels, according to scripture, had their own free will and ability to decide. The reason we're here, right? Adam and Eve partake and disobey of God's law, and that's why we're here. So look, God will put an ultimate end to it, but we are too frail as humans to begin splicing and dicing what we believe is ultimate religious liberty. God in the gospel, Jesus in the gospel said, let the wheat and the tares grow together until he decides, right, how to separate them. So yes, religious liberty is absolute, but it stops where my rights begin, and we defend the religious liberty of the individual, not meaning that we endorse the teachings of obviously Satanism. Let's wrap this video all up, but let's keep going with the current video.
A nation or an empire in the Bible viewed favorably.
I gotta point out that AZ Cactus Flower is saying in the chat that Billy Ray is a real trooper here, hanging out for this hot topic debate, and we really gotta love that you're sticking in there. If you got anything that you want to add to it, you're welcome to chime in at any time.
The only thing I have to say is, like, why are we recognizing Satanism as a religion? I feel like that would solve all of our problems. It's just not a religion.
That's a really good question. It really is. Now, Michael Knowles, he adds something here, and I just want to play this real quick. He points out that the left should love this.
Libs should love this. Libs love saying that no right is absolute until they want their Satan statues in the state capitol. Then all of a sudden the rights are absolute. Your First Amendment right's not absolute when you want to talk on a college campus and you're a conservative. Your First Amendment right's not absolute when you want access to the public square on social media to say your conservative points of view. Your Second Amendment right, oh, that's never absolute. You're only allowed to have a musket. You're this right, you're that right. But you know, the supposed right, never really articulated in American jurisprudence or political philosophy to have a Satan statue. That's the one that is absolute. No, of course not.
I don't want to live in a place where we go tick for tat. Yes, we don't agree with liberals, but let them say whatever they say. We need to stay true to true principles regardless of what they say, right? Truth is the truth no matter what others say, right? And so we need to pursue the truth. I don't like his analogy of going tick for tat with the libs.
Yeah, and so I would even say, and this is something, like, I've done it too, I think we need to stop doing is conflating leftism with liberalism. Because obviously it works in the sense that, like, yes, we understand there's right and left in this country. We're generally on the right, and maybe we'll flush this out in some future episodes when we'll talk about post-liberalism. But what Michael is actually getting at is actually broader than left and right. He's actually attacking, like, lowercase l liberalism in general, which, listen, historically, I actually believe that conservatives in America, we're actually conserving a kind of liberal society. And by liberal, I mean freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right? Lockean liberalism, right? And I think it's a little bit more complicated. I dropped an article on my Substack a while back where America was founded as, like, the best ideas of the Lockean liberal tradition and the Burkean conservatism. So on one hand, we very much strongly, like, our founders very much strongly emphasize the individual liberties of the individual. That's the liberalism. But also the need for strong institutions, right? Our Senate, our House, right? The presidency with the checks and balances, they all check each other. The institutions are important, and that's the conservative part. And so we gotta differentiate here between liberalism and leftism, of which there's a way in which I'm a defender of liberalism, but not leftism ever.
Yeah. This video is almost over, but let's keep going and we'll wrap up.
And I happened upon this today at a salon. An Iowa fight over a satanic display reminds us Republicans believe free speech is only for them. And if you read through this article, it's exactly what Michael is saying. It's all about free speech. It's about freedom of religion. Oh, and by the way, this is a great way to own conservatives and force them to contradict themselves. And that's the whole thing is, Dennis, you said it earlier, that it was just a political ploy. And that's exactly what it is. It is a political ploy in an effort to get conservatives to contradict themselves. And frankly, it's kind of absurd, ridiculous. I think you hit the nail on the head, Billy, of why are we even recognizing Satanism as a religion? Stop acknowledging it as a religion. Stop recognizing it. That's one way to push back. Another way to push back is to apply societal pressure, like you were saying, Dennis.
What'd you think of Donnie's last point there?
Well, obviously, because like we said in the beginning, when it comes to this specifically, that's true, right? They say themselves, we're not a religion. But when it comes to Satanism broadly, listen, it is a religious view that some people hold, right? There are people, there's a guy actually, maybe what we should do, this is what we should do an episode on, just teaser to our audience. There's a guy, Roger Morneau, who literally was a Satanist who converted to Christianity, and he talks about some of the tactics of Satanism. So it is a real religion. And so here's how I'll end my comments, right? And this is what the Gio and Joy Show's been all about. We want to expand the sphere of liberty of conscience, and we want to protect that sphere because we ultimately want to protect our right to religious freedom and our right to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, to talk about our conservative ideals. And so we want to do that. Like, we want government, in as much as it exists and is necessary, to preserve the sphere of religious liberty and the sphere of liberty of conscience. And so I don't want the government to be in the business of deciding what is good religion and what is bad religion. I want to do that myself. I want to have the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion to do that. And so rather than using the government to suppress Satanism, I want to, and back to what Dennis was saying, I want to create the kind of society on the grassroots level that would never accept Satanism just as a societal thing, rather than from this using the sword of Caesar to do it for me.
Yeah, and I'll close with this. Any point when you want to use the sword of Caesar, anytime you want to break down that wall of separation of church and state, you are headed down a path that you don't want to go down to. You will find yourself at war with your own family and friends, people who want to preserve religious liberty. And so we don't want to go down that route. What Dennis said is we need to do the hard work, get on our hands and knees, pray to God, give us the Spirit of God to mingle among the people and use the Spirit of God to persuade people into the truth of Jesus Christ. Until next time on the Gio and Joey Show, be blessed. Happy holidays. God bless you all.